Virtue is a word that we've lost in our culture, that's been slowly being ebbed away. And we see it in the arts and architecture. We see it in the degrading, quote unquote, beauty standards, right? Our world is getting ugly because it's being drained of virtue. Now, when you think about a man like Andrew Tate, certainly there are virtues that he has. For example, he's very confident, very outspoken, he's very productive, but he's not a virtuous man. And it didn't used to be a question, and I don't think that he described himself as a virtuous man. It didn't used to be a question in the foundations of Western civilization in ancient Rome and Greece that the life of a virtuous man is what we were all meant to aspire to as men. That wasn't a question. That was what we all looked towards. That was the North Star that we oriented ourselves toward. And that's the power of Jesus Christ, is he's the ultimate virtuous man. He is the God man, right? He is virtuous in a way that contradicts almost all of the virtues of humans, because God's ways are not our ways. He is the ultimate epitome of human virtue. And so that was what we all aspired to. But when you removed God the Father and the Son from American civilization, let's say, or Western civilization, right, we lost the notion of virtue, of what to look at. And very slowly it ebbed away before we lost any notion of what virtue was at all. And so now instead we look at power. And virtue and power are often very much at odds. Right now, virtue has a certain power to it, which is why people are drawn to it, but it's a spiritual power rather than a material power. And so men who don't have an understanding of what spiritual power is or what virtue is, they orient themselves towards, women too, they orient themselves towards that source of power, right? Material power. And so that's what men like Andrew Tate embody, is material power, because we don't have any sense that there's anything higher than that. We don't have any sense, like, material power is the highest thing to strive for, because we lost the sense of Christ's sacrifice and redemption. We lost that sense. And so, this Andrew Tate is not, he's not a new phenomenon. Certainly he's the new guy on the scene, talking about old things in a very embodied way, right? Like, the Manosphere is a great example. These guys talked about fighting, and they talked about making money, and they talked about, being with lots of chicks, and that's what the Manosphere was. Well, I call Andrew Tate the apex predator of the Manosphere. He came along and he was the guy who did all the things that the other guys just talked about, right? But he's not the end of the conversation. If the conversation is Nietzschean, if it's materialist, yeah, sure, he's the end of the conversation. And you can have that. You can have that, but you can see where that leads. Maybe not now, but run it forward 30 years. Run it forward 30 years, because when you live in this Nietzschean materialist way where it's like, I'm the most powerful guy, well, what happens when you're not able to be a powerful guy anymore? What happens when the other powerful guy comes along and knocks you off and takes your stuff? Are you celebrating the triumph of your materialistic view? Oh, I lost to power. It's like, oh no, it's not fair. It's like, well, there's a better way of living. There's a better way of living, which is following God's way, which is a more sustainable way of living, which means you might not have all the material power that you want. But I think the Bible has some pretty clear teachings in the book of Ecclesiastes about the limits of material power and what it ultimately gets you. Because King Solomon is very clear, all is vanity. All is vanity. And King Solomon had more than any man on earth today can ever dream of having. And at the end of his life, he realized it was vanity. And I think that that's how the Bible can have teachings that are very relevant to men and women, Christian men and women, and secular men and women as well. You go questing for power, you will find it turns to dust in your hands. And there is a better way of being, and that way of being is embodied in virtue. It's harder to achieve, but it's ultimately so much more rewarding. And so the message that I try to promote is, men and women, please go for virtue. Please become virtuous individuals, because that's what this world needs, not more power and money.